Hi, welcome to Cubs and Culture for January 30th, 2018. It's my off day and I feel kind of chatty today, so this is going to be a longer one. So let me first do sort of a baseball update. We're still waiting on you, Darvish. But there was a report last night that apparently the thing he's waiting on and why we don't have a decision is because he's sort of waiting on the Dodgers to clear some salary space to see if they can sign him. The thing is that makes zero sense to me in terms of like human behavior on both like his part and the Dodgers part. So like here's the thing, Yu Darvish is a very good pitcher. He's not he's a very solid pitcher. Like a third starter or a second starter on most teams, and then for like weaker teams and A's. The thing is, he had with the Dodgers like the worst World Series ever. So if there was one villain in terms of like the fan experience for the Dodgers, it's Darvish. So I don't understand. Like maybe he wants to redeem himself, and so that's why he wants to be on the Dodgers. But I don't understand from like the Dodgers like, oh man, we really got to get Yu Darvish to come back here because he put up a 21.6 in the World Series. Like I understand like wanting to add a pitcher of his caliber, but he's not the only free agent available. Like Jake Arrieta is debatably a more reliable pitcher than Yu Darvish. And at least in any case, the difference between them is so small that like in terms of like the fan experience, I don't understand why Darvish is like, yeah, let me become a Dodger again. And Dodgers like, let's try to work this out. Like, do they just hate their own fans? Okay, anyway, I'll keep you updated. Today's going to actually be a multifaceted episode. It's going to center around both Ben-Hur and the movie Gladiator. Because they're actually substantially similar movies. And the thing I want to talk about a lot, I mean, I'll give my review and everything, is Ben-Hur, if you haven't seen it, the subtitle of the book that it's based off of is A Tale of the Christ. It's a revenge story set in with a fictional character named Judah Ben-Hur who has to get revenge. Because of the machinations of the plot, so that's sort of like the main plot, and then sort of the main beats in the story of Christ, like his birth, the Sermon on the Mount, and crucifixion and resurrection. Well, mostly crucifixion. Form something of a subplot, and the movie's a profoundly, deeply Christian film. But for reasons I'll get into, it's actually sort of very interesting that this movie is as Christian as it is because of its production history. Anyway, so it came out in 1959. And it absolutely was the Lord of the Rings of its day. It made $74 million roughly at the box office, which if you do the adjustment for tickets and or inflation, that would be like over $800 million today, which would make it the biggest film of the year this year, and it's overall with adjusting for inflation, it's in the it's 14 currently on the Box Office Mojo list. At one point it was in the top 10, but then like Avatar and The Force Awakens happened, and then it was the first film to win 11 Oscars. The film prior to that was also a huge cultural thing. It's Gone with the Wind, which didn't win 11, but won 10. And then after that, you have Titanic, which was 11, and Return of the King, which was 11. So this is a huge, sort of major film that was released in 1939. 1959. And the thing is, I don't know. So, like in the 1950s, in terms of like its cultural context, there was always, Christian cinema, biblical epics were a recognizable genre of film because you had things like the year prior with also of Charlton Heston, the Ten Commandments, and you had the King of Kings, etc. And so just one of the things about 1959 is what I want to talk about is it's right on the cusp of sort of the beginning of the cultural wars, because in 1960... Okay, so cultural wars, especially because of Trump being in office. There's obviously it might be primarily issues of race and racism, but there's also sort of just actual cultural wars around Christians, Christian identity. So I'm going to mostly ignore. Well, I'm not going to ignore. I'm just acknowledging up front that a lot of times the Christian right stuff might be disingenuous because it's really about race. I'm just going to take them at the word for this particular episode. So just to give some like benchmarks, 1959, that was only 2 years after Brown versus the Board of Education. At the time in 1959, every single sodomy was illegal in every single state. Illinois became the first one in 1960 to outlaw. You were 10 years away from Stonewall, the Stonewall riots, which is sort of the first major incident. Well, second major incident in the LGBT movement. The first one in Compton Cafe, which is much more about the tea than the other one, than about Stonewall, and it has never been fully reclaimed. Happened in 1966. School prayer, not in every single school, but school prayer was still legal because the two cases, Engel in Arlington in 1962 and 1963, which is about state-sponsored school prayer, was not allowed. You are 6 years away from Griswold, which is the sort of the first case. It's about contraception. It's the sort of the basis of the right of privacy. And then you also had Roe, and then you were 14 years away from Roe v. Wade, which is 1973 from 1973. So 1959 is right on the cusp of being sort of like the major cultural upheavals that happened in the 60s, both in terms of legality and just sort of culturally. And the thing is, Ben-Hur being like sort of this great biblical epic, like in some ways you can see it almost as like a hoorah of Christian cultural dominance. And so like there's this, let me pause for a second. So one of the things about this is this argument comes up a lot in various legal things, like about gay marriage or about contraception or state-sponsored school prayer, but whether or not the United States is a Christian nation or not. And obviously, if you're talking about the state, the government, obviously not, because you have the First Amendment, which doesn't allow for the establishment of religion. You have like the Declaration of War of Tripoli, which flatly states that the U.S. is not a Christian nation. You have sort of you have in the Federalist Papers where I think it's 56, where Hamilton declares that the president has no ecclesiastic, i.e., church authority. You have the no religious test clause, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're talking, if you define nation as, nation is that which concerns the business of the state, then of course the United States is not a Christian nation. The thing is, I don't think people on the right, even though they might be using this phrase to call for state action, I don't think they're actually thinking, because most people, the average voter is a moron. So this non-state versus state distinction might not occur to a lot of people, and so I think it's a little bit disingenuous of people on the left to complain about, well, this person's claiming we're a Christian nation. Well, this 1790 treaty says we're not. Like, yes, for a legal argument that's relevant, but the person's actually speaking kind of culturally. And here's the thing. In the 1950s, again, this Ben-Hur being this Christian movie is a huge sort of example of this. We were a lot more culturally Christian, but here, even to this day, culturally, just talking about sort of like demographics, 70 to 75% of all people, Americans, still claim to be Christian. 40% are strongly Christian, as in they go to church like a couple times a month. Once a week church attendance is still 20%, etc. There's a ton of things, like, it's impossible to have grown up in American culture without having, even if you're not a Christian, without knowing sort of the big beats of the Christ narrative. Or knowing things like the Sermon on the Mount contains the phrase, blessed are the peacemaker, etc. So, like, on one hand, yes, we're not if you mean that the state isn't Christian, but at the same time, there's this huge part of Western civilization and American culture, which is in fact culturally Christian. And the culture wars are sort of centered around that. So let me just quickly wrap up. One of the reasons why this is such an interesting moving on this front is, Gore Vidal is one of the screenwriters. He's gay, but and then William Wyler, who is the director, and he's sort of really the driving force behind this film. He's Jewish. I don't know if he's observant, but he's not a Christian. And okay, so let me pause. Well, actually, one last thing. Let me pause. Even though Ben-Hur in 1959 was this huge box office success, won 11 Oscars, that was actually remade in 2016, and it wasn't treated by the studio it was treated as a smaller niche project as opposed to this major production, and it flopped badly. Both at, like, it made only $24 million. Now, granted, the